America ridiculed Canadian oil for more than a full year, hitting it hard at press briefings where reporters gathered, on bustling factory floors amid the hum of machinery, across the endless scroll of social media platforms, and even at the elite gatherings in Davos, not once, but twice, amplifying the message to global influencers. He stood there boldly and proclaimed to the entire world, "We don't need their oil and gas at all. We've got more reserves than anybody else on this planet." Those exact words echoed through international channels, and every single world leader, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, all of them, heard him deliver that dismissal loud and clear, as if it were a deliberate broadcast to reshape alliances. Yet here's the stark reality. 60%, yes, a massive 60%, of America's crude oil imports flow directly from Canada, its northern neighbor. 60%. That means more than half of his entire oil supply hinges entirely on Canadian production and pipelines. And despite this undeniable dependency, he positioned himself on the grandest world stages, from summits to speeches, and outright declared it all as utterly worthless, as if it held no value in the global energy game. It was a bold, unapologetic rejection that carried weight far beyond the borders of North America. Pause right here and really let that sink in, because this wasn't some isolated slip of the tongue or a momentary gaffe caught on camera. No, this was a calculated, sustained campaign, a series of repeated blows designed to undermine and belittle. He didn't stop at oil. He broadened the attack, insisting time and again that he didn't need Canadian lumber, those vast forests providing essential building materials for homes and industries. He claimed he didn't need Canadian vehicles, the auto sector that employs thousands and drives cross-border trade. And of course, he hammered home that he didn't need Canadian oil, the lifeblood of energy security. Just 3 concise sentences, but they targeted 3 massive industries: lumber, automotive, petroleum, effectively dismissing an entire sovereign nation as irrelevant in the economic landscape. It was like waving away a key partner with a flick of the wrist, reducing decades of collaboration to nothing. Then, as if that weren't enough, he abandoned any facade that this was purely about fair trade negotiations or economic balancing. He escalated the rhetoric in a way that crossed into outright dominance. He publicly labeled Canada as nothing more than the 51st state, implying it was an extension of American territory rather than an independent country with its own laws, culture, and governance. He went further, referring to its prime minister not with the respect due to a head of government, but as a mere governor. And this wasn't delivered as lighthearted banter or a joke to ease tension. It was a deliberate, pointed refusal to acknowledge a sovereign leader as an equal on the world stage. To top it off, he dangled the threat of imposing tariffs at a staggering 100%, a move that could cripple economies and spark retaliatory measures. And finally, he laid it out in the plainest terms possible. Canada only exists because of the benevolence and protection of the United States. It was a statement loaded with condescension, framing the relationship not as one of mutual benefit, but as one of subordination. Remember that exact tone he used, that unmistakable mark of superiority. It came across like a stern parent issuing a warning to a misbehaving child, demanding obedience or else face consequences. It wasn't diplomacy. It was domination, broadcast for all to see and hear, leaving no room for interpretation. But here's the critical miscalculation he made, the blind spot in his strategy that's now unraveling everything. While he was busy with these public displays, other nations weren't just passive observers. India was paying close attention, its leaders and analysts noting every word. Australia was tuned in, weighing the implications for their own alliances. Japan was listening intently, considering the ripple effects on global stability. The European Union, with its collective of powerful economies, was absorbing it all. And crucially, none of these players interpreted his barbs as merely an insult directed at Canada alone, a spat between neighbors. No, every single one of them heard it for what it truly was: a broader warning about the unreliability and volatility of America itself under this leadership. Think about the gravity of that shift in perception. If even the closest ally on the entire planet, the one sharing the world's longest undefended border, intertwined economies, and a history of cooperation, can be humiliated and degraded like this, right out in the open, on camera, for an entire year without respite, then absolutely nobody is safe. No alliance feels secure. No partnership seems ironclad when the dominant player treats its nearest friend with such disdain. Nations that suddenly feel terrified and vulnerable in this new reality don't just sit idly by, wringing their hands and hoping for better days. They act decisively, pivoting to protect their interests, seeking new paths to security and prosperity. They forge ahead with alternatives, building redundancies into their systems to avoid being caught off guard again. And that's exactly what unfolded in dramatic fashion. Just days ago, the Strait of Hormuz, the vital artery pulsing through the Middle East, shut down completely, a geopolitical shockwave that sent ripples across global markets. This wasn't a minor hiccup. It erased 20% of the world's entire oil supply from circulation overnight. 20 million barrels per day simply gone, evaporated from the daily flow that powers economies worldwide. Tanker traffic, those massive ships laden with crude, plummeted to near zero, leaving ports idle and supplies stalled. Insurance companies, assessing the skyrocketing risks of conflict or seizure, pulled their coverage entirely, refusing to underwrite voyages through the troubled waters. As a result, an estimated 15 million barrels a day now sit stranded in holding patterns, with nowhere safe to go, accumulating costs and uncertainty. The planet's single most important oil choke point, the narrow gateway that controls so much of global energy trade, went completely dark, plunging markets into chaos and forcing nations to scramble for alternatives. Connect the dots here. One full year dedicated to mocking and devaluing Canadian oil, portraying it as unnecessary and inferior. Then, in a single decision or event that triggered this closure, whether through escalating tensions, military maneuvers, or diplomatic breakdowns, the entire world finds itself suddenly desperate for reliable, secure sources of that very same oil. The dismissal has backfired spectacularly, highlighting the fragility of over-reliance on volatile regions. Now, really taste the biting irony of this turnaround, because it's almost poetic in its reversal. Canada, often understated in global energy discussions, actually sits on an enormous treasure trove, 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, ranking it as the third largest holder on the entire Earth. Only 2 countries surpass Canada in this metric. One of those top-ranked nations is mired in internal chaos, its production hampered by instability and sanctions. The other is entangled in the very regional disruptions that just led to the Strait's shutdown, making its oil vulnerable to the same blockades and risks. Canada, by contrast, is neither chaotic nor surrounded by conflict. It operates in a stable democratic environment with robust infrastructure and rule of law, far removed from the flashpoints of the Middle East. Adding to this advantage, in 2024, Canada finally completed a monumental infrastructure project, a pipeline that cost a whopping $34 billion and demanded years of planning, construction, and regulatory hurdles to bring to fruition. Known as the Trans Mountain Pipeline, it now efficiently carries oil straight from the heart of Alberta's oil sands directly to the Pacific coast, opening up new export routes to Asia and beyond. What makes this so game-changing is the absence of any vulnerable choke point along the way. Nothing between the wellhead where the oil is extracted and the end customer who needs it. There's no strait that can be arbitrarily shut down by geopolitical tensions. No insurance policies that can be abruptly pulled due to heightened risks. No disruptions from conflicts or piracy. And absolutely no added layers of uncertainty or peril that plague other routes. While the bulk of the world's oil remains hopelessly trapped behind this now-closed strait, bottlenecked and inaccessible, Canadian oil continues to flow without interruption, unthreatened by the turmoil, moving steadily and reliably straight to the Pacific ports. From there, it reaches every major buyer on the other side of the ocean, nations in Asia hungry for energy, who are now paying extraordinarily close attention to this stable alternative, reevaluating their supply chains in light of the crisis. This shift in perception isn't just anecdotal, it's backed by expert analysis. This very week, Rory Johnston, a respected Toronto-based researcher specializing in oil markets, put it succinctly in his commentary. He noted that Canada's unwavering stability during this period of widespread chaos is being regarded by international buyers not as some charitable gesture or a temporary discount to lure them in, but as a genuine intrinsic benefit, a premium feature that justifies higher interest and potentially even higher prices. It's not about favors, it's about reliability in an unreliable world. The very oil that was once publicly branded as worthless, dismissed as surplus to requirements, has transformed overnight into the safest, most dependable barrel on the entire earth. And now, every country that watched from afar as he mocked it relentlessly is scrambling to get in line, eager to secure their share before supplies tighten further. Let that profound reversal really settle in your mind for a moment, because it underscores a massive geopolitical pivot. Compounding this irony, the exact same week that the Strait slammed shut, triggering global energy alarms, Mark Carney touched down in India, marking the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to that rising powerhouse since way back in 2018. But this wasn't a ceremonial trip filled with photo ops and vague discussions. Carney didn't go merely to talk or exchange pleasantries. He went with a clear purpose: to sign on the dotted line, to finalize concrete agreements that would reshape trade flows. And the scale was immense. $5.5 billion in deals locked in. The kind of blockbuster numbers that simply don't materialize out of thin air or casual chats. They only happen when both sides have already done their homework, aligned their interests, and know precisely what they want to exchange, down to the last detail. At the heart of these agreements, the true centerpiece that stole the spotlight, a $2.6 billion commitment for uranium sourced directly from Saskatchewan's rich deposits, 22 million pounds of the stuff, an amount substantial enough to fuel India's ambitious nuclear energy program for nearly a full decade. This wasn't about oil directly, but something even bigger, more foundational to long-term energy independence. Uranium represents the resource that powers clean, reliable nuclear reactors, ensuring that India never again has to depend on someone else's precarious oil choke point, vulnerable to shutdowns or manipulations. In essence, Canada just handed them the key to unlocking true energy sovereignty, a move that strengthens India's position in a world of uncertain supplies. But while the sheer dollar figure and volume are impressive, they weren't the real headline grabber in this story. No, the standout moment came from what India openly declared. An high-ranking Indian official, speaking directly to reporters in a candid moment, laid it out without ambiguity. We are willing to buy whatever Canada is offering. Whatever Canada is offering. It was a sweeping, enthusiastic endorsement that signaled a complete openness to Canadian resources across the board. Sit with that statement for a moment and absorb its full implications. It's a far cry from rejection. It's an all-in embrace. For over a year, the most powerful man on earth had been telling the world in no uncertain terms that he had absolutely no need for what Canada sells. Its resources, its products, its contributions to global trade. Yet this week, the fastest growing major economy on the planet, with its booming population and insatiable demand for energy and materials, flipped the script entirely. Everything you have, we want it. They weren't mincing words. They were issuing a blanket invitation for deepened ties. That kind of declaration isn't just a routine trade deal hashed out in backrooms. No, that is a resounding verdict, a clear judgment on who was fundamentally wrong in their assessment of Canada's value and America's approach. It's a rebuke delivered through action, not rhetoric, highlighting the short-sightedness of the earlier dismissals. And true to form, India isn't dragging its feet or playing coy. They've set a hard deadline, a concrete timeline to make this vision reality. A full, comprehensive free trade agreement with Canada, locked in by December of this very year. This isn't about endless rounds of talks that drag on indefinitely, nor is it about tentatively exploring options and contingencies. It's December. firm, non-negotiable, with both sides committed to hitting the mark. Their goal is ambitious: to double the current trade volume between the two nations to a staggering $70 billion per year, encompassing a wide array of sectors: energy to power growth, minerals for manufacturing, food to feed populations, technology to innovate. It's the entire bilateral relationship being rebuilt, fortified, and expanded in under 12 months, a blistering pace that speaks to urgency and opportunity. Think about that acceleration, that sense of momentum. It's like watching a new economic axis form before your eyes. Fresh off that success, Carney didn't waste time. He boarded a plane and headed straight to Australia, where he met with Prime Minister Albanese in high-level discussions. He didn't stop there. He addressed the Australian Parliament directly, becoming the first Canadian Prime Minister invited to do so in nearly 2 full decades. Why zero in on Australia at this pivotal moment? Because just like India, they're sitting on the edge of the same stark realization that the Strait's closure has forced into sharp focus. The old arrangements, the traditional alliances that once seemed unbreakable, no longer provide the ironclad protection they once did. In a world where insults fly at press conferences and are passed off as diplomacy, you need new partners, reliable ones who treat you with respect, not condescension. Seizing this opportunity, Canada and Australia are now actively building what Carney himself described as the largest collective mineral reserve controlled by trusted, like-minded democratic nations. This isn't just about stockpiling resources. It's about linking them strategically, tying together supply chains for critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earths that power everything from batteries to electronics, while simultaneously deepening defense collaborations to ensure mutual security. Already, Canada has made a tangible move by purchasing Australia's advanced JORN radar system, specifically tailored for monitoring the vast Arctic expanses. Now, the two countries, one perched at the top of the world, the other at the bottom, are connected in ways that go beyond geography, forming a polar axis of cooperation that enhances surveillance, resource sharing, and strategic deterrence. And then, in a moment that should have set off alarms in diplomatic circles, Carney delivered a statement that every official in Washington ought to have read not once, but twice, underlining it for emphasis. He pointed out that Europe, Australia, Canada, Japan, and South Korea, when combined, boast a collective GDP that is already larger than that of the United States itself. It's a reminder that so-called middle powers aren't as middling as they might seem. They hold far more collective influence than many realize or acknowledge. And crucially, this isn't a projection for the future. It's the reality right now in the present economic landscape. He didn't stop there. He also highlighted that, at this moment, a full 70 cents of every single Canadian defense dollar is directed toward American suppliers and systems. But his underlying message was crystal clear, delivered with diplomatic precision: that heavy reliance, that one-sided flow, is on the verge of changing as Canada diversifies its partnerships to reduce vulnerabilities. Building on this theme, these forward-thinking countries are already pushing ahead with ambitious plans to integrate the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade framework spanning the Pacific Rim, with the massive economic bloc of the European Union. If that linkage comes to fruition, it would create an unprecedented trading powerhouse. 1.5 billion people united under one cohesive set of rules and markets, all operating without the inclusion of the United States. It's a vision of a multipolar world where America's dominance isn't assumed but earned, or potentially sidelined. But Carney's diplomatic blitz isn't wrapping up anytime soon. Japan is next on the itinerary, the world's fourth largest economy, a technological giant with deep energy needs and strategic concerns. 3 major nations visited, 10 intense days of negotiations and announcements, covering oil for immediate energy security, uranium for long-term nuclear independence, critical minerals for future industries, and defense pacts for shared protection. This is a coalition being constructed in real time, brick by brick, agreement by agreement, right as the global order shifts. Meanwhile, back across the border, the leader who once branded Canadian oil as nothing but trash, unworthy of consideration, now watches helplessly as the very choke point he had counted on for leverage, the Strait of Hormuz, collapses under pressure, taking his strategic advantage down with it in a cascade of lost influence. Let me put a direct question to you now to make this personal and drive the point home. If someone, anyone, spent an entire year publicly calling your single most valuable resource absolute garbage, right on camera for the world to see, belittling it relentlessly as if it were disposable, and then, through their own actions or oversights, made a decision that suddenly left the entire planet desperate and scrambling for exactly that resource you hold. And while the rest of the world panicked in the fallout, you calmly and methodically signed $5.5 billion worth of fresh deals, secured a firm free trade deadline with the planet's fastest growing major economy, and assembled a formidable coalition of partners whose combined economic might actually exceeds his own. Would you ever, in a million years, go back to the old way of doing things? Would you return to a dependency that proved so toxic and unreliable? Drop your honest answer in the comments section below. Keep it simple. Yes or no? Would Canada ever go back to relying so heavily on a country that treated it with such open disrespect, such casual dismissal? Because here's the unvarnished truth. None of this momentum reverses easily, if at all. The Trans Mountain Pipeline stands fully built and operational, a $34 billion investment that's now paying dividends in access and security. The uranium contracts with India are locked in solid, extending all the way through to 2035, providing a decade plus of committed supply. India has publicly committed to that December deadline for the Free Trade Pact, with teams already working overtime to meet it. Australia is deeply integrating its defense capabilities and mineral supply chains with Canada's, creating interdependencies that strengthen both. And Japan, as the next stop, is poised to join this emerging network, adding its economic weight and technological prowess. None of these transformative developments even existed on the horizon just 2 years ago. They were ideas at best or distant possibilities, but all of them exist today in tangible form. Agreements signed, infrastructure online, alliances forged, reshaping the global map in ways that can't be undone with a simple apology or policy tweak. The oil that was once derided as garbage, laughed off as unnecessary, is now universally recognized as the safest, most reliable barrel on Earth, immune to the choke points that plague others. The country that was insultingly called a mere 51st state, as if it lacked true sovereignty, now anchors a powerful coalition whose collective economy not only rivals but surpasses his in scale and potential. The prime minister, who was demeaned as nothing more than a governor, a subordinate figure, has just orchestrated and closed more significant trade deals in a mere 10 days than Washington has managed to pull off in the entire past year, demonstrating agility and vision in the face of adversity. Pipelines, once constructed, don't simply reverse their flow on a whim. They're engineered for permanence, directing resources forward. Contracts, especially multi-billion-dollar ones spanning years, don't unwind or dissolve just because circumstances change or regrets surface. They're binding commitments with legal teeth. And perhaps most crucially, trust between nations. That fragile foundation of international relations, once shattered through public humiliation and disregard, doesn't magically return on request or demand. It requires time, consistency, and genuine effort to rebuild, if it can be rebuilt at all. Now you see the full picture, the interconnected web of cause and effect that's led us here. Now you can confidently explain to anyone who dismisses this as a temporary blip, a passing storm in global affairs, exactly why it isn't. Why these shifts represent a permanent realignment, a new chapter in how nations interact and secure their futures. This entire narrative ties straight back into a video I released earlier titled "Trump Buy Our Jets." If you haven't seen it yet, Pull it up and watch what Canada actually did in response to similar pressures. It vividly illustrates what happens when a country finally stops taking orders from afar, stops bending to external demands, and instead starts building on its own terms, forging its path with independence, innovation, and strategic partnerships. The video is queued up and playing right now on your screen, ready for you to dive in. If this story matters to you, if it resonates with the bigger themes of sovereignty, respect, and global change, then hit that hype button. It's more than just a like. It pushes this content out to the people who truly need to see it, the ones making decisions or forming opinions, all before the mainstream headlines finally catch up and spin their own versions. And if you want to stay ahead of these developments, to see them first as they unfold, make sure to subscribe. You're already witnessing the shift before the rest of the world wakes up to it.